Does this podcast make you happy? Of course it does. That's why you're here. But it only comes out once a week. For happiness every night, you need Adam and Eve. Yes, I'm talking about sex toys. It's cool. You have earbuds in, right? Adam and Eve, America's most trusted source for adult products, has been making people very happy for over 50 years. With thousands of toys for both men and women. Just go to adamandeve.com now and enter code IHEART for 50% off almost any one item, plus free discreet shipping. That's adamandeve.com, code IHEART for 50% off.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Chapter 6. Jack Valenti. This evening belongs to a young man who made it big without having to hurt anyone to do it. This quote appeared in the 1966 banquet program for the grand gala dinner held for Jack Valenti upon his leaving the White House for his new position as the head of the Motion Picture Association of America. Jack Valenti was the shooter on the grassy knoll, making the aforementioned quote rather ironic. Technically, there were two shooters on the knoll, the other being David Ferry. However, the fatal headshot was delivered from behind the picket fence by Valenti. Zapruder film frame 313 illustrates the damage caused by Valenti's Enfield 303. Ironically enough, the true name of what we called the Enfield 303 is actually the Lee Enfield 303 SMLE, or Short Magazine Lee Enfield. At this point, one has to ask themselves if the irony is intentional or not. I will discuss the rifle and the mechanisms by which the assassination took place in the chapters that follow. But for now, I want to discuss the man on the grassy knoll, Jack Valenti. On May 1st, 2007, Senator Dianne Feinstein introduced a resolution to the U.S. Senate to honor the life of Jack Valenti as he had passed away on April the 26th. Jack Valenti was a larger-than-life man and an innovator who built the Motion Picture Association of America into a great institution, Senator Feinstein said. More than that, he was a friend who was truly missed. My condolences go to Mary Margaret, their children, and the rest of the Valenti family. Valenti's funeral was a who's who of celebrities and politicians. The guest list included the likes of Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Kirk and Michael Douglas, Clint Eastwood, Disney CEO Michael Eisner, Nancy Pelosi, and John Kerry. The funeral was massive. Anyone who was anyone in Hollywood and Washington was there. Several of the more important guests whom were closest to Valenti were given the title of honorary pallbearer, current president Joseph R. Biden being one of them. Valenti's role in shaping American history cannot be overstated. I consider him to be the most important person from American history that most people, especially today, have never heard of. His influence on our culture and direction as a nation began on November 22nd, 1963, and has lasted to this very day. If you were subjected to Hollywood propaganda between 1966 and 2004, then Jack Valenti played a direct role in shaping your perception of the world. Valenti appears to have been swept up in a whirlwind of success after the events in Dallas. From Houston ad man to LBJ's primary advisor in the White House, Valenti appears to be a true American success story. His political career was followed by a lengthy stint as head of the Motion Picture Association of America, where he became the architect of the movie rating system. Valenti lived a charmed life. Working for the CIA has its benefits. I see Jack's employment, and I specifically use the word employment, with the CIA as foundational to understanding his meteoric rise to success. Before we get into Jack's background, let me lay out what I consider to be conclusive evidence of Valenti's double life. A December 12, 1963 FBI memo from C.D. Deloach to Mr. Moore, presumably John P. Moore, assistant to the FBI administrative director. Subject, Jack J. Valenti, shines a light on who Jack really was. To put it in the proper context, once LBJ had assumed the presidency and had begun to put his people in place, everyone and everything had to be administratively managed. That included ensuring that people were placed on the correct government branch payroll. The contents of this memo show that Jack Valenti had been on a covert government payroll. Walter Jenkins called me from the White House at 12:40 p.m. today. He mentioned that the president planned to move several people in federal agencies over on the White House payroll. Captioned individual is one of these people. Let's take a minute and break down this memo because there's a lot of substance here. First off, let's be clear on who and what this memo is addressing. The subject, as referenced in the memo as the captioned individual, is Jack J. Valenti. The purpose of the memo is to notify the assistant to the administrative director of the FBI, John P. Moore, that Jack Valenti's payroll would have to be moved to the White House payroll. We don't even have to speculate on where Valenti's payroll had to be moved from, as the memo tells us that Valenti was one of several people whose payroll had to be moved from federal agencies. For the last decade, Valenti had been running his ad business, Weekly and Valenti in Houston, where he had been servicing clients like Continental Oil. He and his company were hired as private contractors to run LBJ's campaigns in Texas. Then in 1960, Weekly and Valenti scored Kennedy's ad contract for his presidential run. What federal agency could Valenti possibly have been working for, whereas he was on a government payroll, yet making millions running a private corporation? The CIA, obviously. There's no other plausible explanation, and when you come to understand who Valenti was and who he surrounded himself with, it becomes strikingly obvious. Valenti was a lifelong soldier for the intelligence apparatus. There are things I can tell you with certainty about Valenti, and there are things I wildly speculate about, despite the fact that my speculations are probably correct. I'm going to refrain from speculating about his larger role in the scheme of things and the potential involvement in other past events. I'm going to lay out his familial and professional connections, his history going back to his employment at Humble Oil as a teenager, and his seeming lack of awareness of where he was on November 22nd, 1963. My determination of Valenti's role on the Knoll was determined by three primary factors. The first being his long shady history and associations he held leading up to the assassination that we will discuss here. The second being that despite the fact that Valenti had claimed that where he was when he found out Kennedy was killed was etched in his mind, he never gave the same story twice in regards to where he was during the motorcade. The third being the photographic record, which conclusively puts him somewhere he certainly shouldn't be in the moments after the assassination. Jack Valenti was born in Houston, Texas, September 5th, 1921. He was born into two mob families, the DeGeorge family via his mother, Josephine DeGeorge, and the Valenti family via his father, Giuseppe Valenti, aka Joseph Valenti. You will find between the 40s and the 60s a smattering of DeGeorges and Valentis, everywhere from Tampa under Traficante to Houston and Philadelphia. Valenti always denied his family was connected to the mob, but a review of Jack's file shows that the Bureau had a plethora of information not only on Jack, but on his father as well. As I read through the Valenti FBI files, one thing that jumped off the page at me was the fact that the FBI referenced in their 1963 background check of Valenti a file indicating he'd been investigated previously in 1961, and before that at an unspecified time. The file never elaborates or presents any documents from those previous investigations or why there were investigations in the first place. What we do have is an FBI list of codes indicating what crimes were associated with Jack and his father. However, in what capacity, meaning victim, witness, or suspect, is unknown. Jack Valenti, according to the FBI, had 3 files under the name Jack Joseph Valenti. The FBI case classifications were 29, 31, and 62. Case files designated with a 29 indicate the case file was documenting a bank fraud. A 31 indicator is a designation for a violation of the White Slave Trafficking Act. At the time, violations of the White Slave Trafficking Act had to do with crimes like bringing someone across state lines for an illegal abortion, which is exactly what I suspect Valenti did for his master LBJ and LBJ's mistress Mary Margaret Wiley before she became Mrs. Mary Margaret Valenti. Can you see the tangled scheme that is beginning to take shape? A 62 designation is labeled miscellaneous, which I assume is something benign like a background check. What specifically the FBI had investigated in regards to Valenti prior to November 22nd, 1963 is unknown. After the heading Jack, we have the heading Joseph. This is presumably Jack's father. Here's where things get interesting. Jack's father's history, as per the official story, is a blatant lie. According to the limited sources of information we have on Joseph Valenti, the only criminal charges we are supposed to know about stem from an embezzlement case. Joseph Valenti had served just over 2 years in prison for what boils down to theft from the Harris County Tax Collector's Office that he was gainfully employed by. This happened in 1937. According to the file, Joseph Valenti was charged in 3 separate indictments with fraudulently taking, misapplying, and converting to his own use money that came into his possession by virtue of his being deputy assessor and collector of taxes of Harris County. He'd be one sorry mobster if that's all he did in his career. While this is the worst that the Jack Valenti file overtly tells us about Joe's background, the list of criminal investigations under Joe's name is staggering. There were a total of 36 criminal investigations into Joseph Valenti by the date of this report, which was December 12, 1963. The implication here is that there is much more to the criminal life of Joseph Valenti than we are led to believe. Joseph's list of investigations by the FBI include violations of the Labor Management Relations Act. If you need me to interpret, that means Joe was somehow involved with the unions. And back in the day, union meant mafia. He has 1 investigation into civil unrest, 10 investigations into possible violations of what was noted as domestic security, 3 investigations into his role in racketeering, 1 for unlawful flight, 1 for espionage, 3 for treason, 1 investigation for allegations of desertion, and 1 investigation of falsely claimed citizenship. These, plus a slew of unknown and miscellaneous files, and I would say you have yourself one stone-cold mobster. It would appear there was an attempt to cover this up. Why would the FBI want to cover this up instead of use it to disqualify Valenti? Once again, it's because the FBI's number one job is to cover for the CIA. This is exactly what they did for Jack Valenti. One of the more interesting notations under Joseph Valenti's list of investigations was case file 63-5327-A. There's nothing more than a case file, a reference, and a date. 63-5327-A, Detroit News, 9/29/63. The reference to Detroit News I took as a reference to the Detroit Free Press, the only paper of note in Detroit. I pulled this edition of the paper from an online archive, spent an entire day reading the September 29th, 1963 edition. After hours of perusing dozens of articles, letters to the editor, and countless ads for brand new appliances, I believe I found what the Valenti file was referencing. Buried beyond page 6 was a small article titled "Trevor Gardner is found dead, U.S. ex-official." Trevor Gardner, controversial chief of Air Force Research and Development in the Eisenhower administration, was found dead today at his Washington home. He was 48 years old. Washington police say a handyman found Mr. Gardner's body in the second-story bathroom. District Coroner Richard L. Welton termed the death natural pending an autopsy. Mr. Gardner, who rose to the position of Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Research and Development before he was 40, resigned in 1956 after a little more than a year in the job. His resignation came after a clash with Secretary of Defense Charles E. Wilson and the Secretary of the Air Force Donald A. Quarles over his demands to increase funds for the development of the intercontinental ballistic missile. Detroit Free Press. Trevor Gardner is found dead, U.S. ex-official, September 29th, 1963. That's weird, wouldn't you say? It appears as though Mr. Gardner had fallen into the dustbin of history, with little attention paid to his untimely death of unknown causes. Time magazine article from February 20th, 1956, claimed that Gardner stepped on many toes when he objected to what he believed were funding shortfalls when it came to research and development. What was going on with the Air Force and R&D in 1956? Could it be the development and testing of the U-2 spy plane program? Being in the position he was in, Gardner would have been the high-ranking insider atop the upper echelon of the program. According to Gardner, he resigned when he did due to an honest difference of opinion about the level of support for the Air Force Research and Development Program. I'm not sure which is stranger, Gardner's death and history's failure to comment on it ever again, or the notion that the FBI possibly referenced the article on Gardner in a list of investigations done into Joseph Valenti. There's nothing concrete here. There might not be a connection at all, but I think you can see what I'm implying. What this odd quasi-possible connection does is make you realize how much more potential history is hiding out there in plain sight that we will never truly know about. After Jack graduated from high school at the top of his class, he attended the University of Houston. Valenti went to school part-time at night. During the day, he worked for Humble Oil. He started at Humble at the age of 16 back in 1937. He was what was known as a hall boy. Today, that would be a combination of mail carrier and all-around do-boy. He spent a total of 17 years at Humble and moved up the ranks to become a manager of sales promotion and advertising. He worked in Houston for Humble well throughout the time that George DeMornshield is known to have been employed by them as well. I believe it's safe to assume they knew each other. Over the years, Valenti maintained an immense list of what I would deem to be strange bedfellows, euphemistically speaking. George DeMornshield was undoubtedly among them. Midway through his studies at the University of Houston, Valenti joined the military. I don't have a thing to go on other than a hunch when I say I don't believe Jack Valenti's alleged war record in the slightest. I think if you are recruited to shoot the president, it would have to stem from a high level of proficiency with a rifle that would have been observed, recruited, and developed during the war. Valenti was allegedly a hero pilot during World War II, having flown 51 bombing missions. A review of his record shows he served mostly in a training capacity until March of 1944. He entered the U.S. Army Air Force Enlisted Reserve Corps in May of 1942. May of 42 also happens to be one of the most formational months of the OSS after the change in name from the Office of the Coordinator of Information. Valenti is not listed as having entered active duty until February of 1943, when he is stationed in Houston, Texas. He's then honorably discharged from the service in March of 1944.
Life can change in an instant. My brother-in-law died suddenly, leaving behind my sister and her 2 young kids. He didn't have life insurance, so now they're facing the unthinkable, leaving their home. After seeing what they went through, I immediately called SelectQuote to get life insurance for my family. In 15 minutes, a licensed insurance agent compared policies from highly rated carriers to find me the right coverage in my budget. I got a $500,000 policy for only $16 a month. Plus, I qualified for same-day life insurance. No medical exam was required, and I was covered by the time I hung up. Even if you have a health concern, SelectQuote agents can find you the right policy at the lowest price. And while you can't prepare emotionally for a loss, SelectQuote can give you peace of mind with life insurance. Don't wait until it's too late.
Go to SelectQuote.com to get your free quote today. That's SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. Details on example rate at SelectQuote.com.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
The entire time he'd been right here in the United States. After being discharged as an aviation cadet at Douglas Airfield on March 12, 1944, he's then commissioned as a second lieutenant, issued a new serial number, and deployed once again. According to a report, he entered active duty at Douglas Army Airfield, Arizona. He was honorably released from active duty on October 16, 1945, as a first lieutenant at Fort Sam Houston by reason of demobilization. The file makes no mention of where or when Valenti was stationed in Europe. If he went to Europe at all, it would have been between the months of March of 44 and October of 45, but we have no record on Valenti from that time. We just have to take the government's word for it. I would argue that if Valenti went to Europe at all, it was not as a bomber pilot, but as something more sinister. Valenti allegedly stayed an active part of the Air Force Officers Reserve Corps until 1953, when he was again honorably discharged. Anytime I see that someone was part of military reserves, I always interpret that right away as intelligence. 2 weekends a month and 2 weeks a year is more than enough of a cover for covert operatives to get out of their normal routine to carry out assignments. Valenti was awarded with the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, and the European Campaign Medal with 3 bronze service stars. Valenti would eventually be buried at Arlington National Cemetery as if he were some kind of hero. Valenti was particularly close to the DoD and CIA. He helped both to accomplish their aims in Hollywood, and in return was a guest both at Langley and the Pentagon. When the DoD was considering shutting down its entertainment liaison offices in the late 90s, it was Valenti who spearheaded a campaign of Hollywood's big shots to lobby the Pentagon to keep Strub and the liaison office network intact. For reasons that aren't wholly clear, Valenti had a burning desire to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. He wrote to successive secretaries of defense, including William Cohen, Donald Rumsfeld, and Robert Gates, asking their permission for a special waiver, as it is usually only for those who have died in combat or who are granted exceptional service medals that gain that privilege. After returning from the war, Valenti returns to his position at Humble Oil and resumes his studies at the University of Houston. Something of note I had come across in Jack's file had to do with his extracurricular activities while at the University of Houston. Jack had to reschedule several of his final exams due to his work with Humble Oil and a program they had created in which they would sponsor college football games. There is little information on the program other than this paragraph. There was an indication that he was required to travel to all of the schools in the Southwest Conference in connection with the scheduling of football broadcasts of the games of these schools that were sponsored by the Humble Oil and Refining Company. The FBI did their due diligence and on December 16, 1963, interviewed a man whose name had been redacted from the report. The report indicated that this man had been in charge of Humble Oil's broadcasts of their sponsored college football games. Based on the information provided in the report, I believe this man to have been Kern Tips, the senior vice president of McCann Erickson Inc., Humble Oil's ad firm. He advised that he had known Valenti for many years due to their association with Humble Oil, but that they were not close and had no social affiliation. He noted that when he had been broadcasting football games as sponsored by Humble Oil, he'd been doing so independently and never had any association with Valenti in that regard. The man who had been in charge of Humble Oil's broadcasts of their sponsored football games had no association with Valenti in regards to these events. What exactly was Jack doing when he was allegedly out of town working for Humble Oil? I think it's pretty obvious Jack lied about what he was doing when he rescheduled his final exams. This was around May of 1946, long after Valenti had returned from the war and had made his bones doing whatever he was doing. Why did Jack lie? Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever know. After Valenti graduated from the University of Houston, he applied to Harvard but had been rejected. He had been told he was ineligible. Of course, this didn't stop Valenti, who took it upon himself to fly to Boston and rectify the situation in person. He made a trip to Boston at his own expense and was able to secure permission to enter the business school and attend for 18 months. Jack Valenti, whose academic record made him ineligible to attend Harvard's Business School's master's program as he was a BC student, flies to Boston after being rejected by admissions, sweet talks whomever he had to, and after one weekend is not only granted admission, he's placed in an accelerated honors program that will take him only 18 months to complete. It must be nice to have friends in high places. After Valenti completed Harvard, he returned to Humble Oil, where he stayed until he and partner Weldon Weekly launched their own advertising firm, Weekly and Valenti. When the FBI began their background investigation into Valenti in December of 1963, there were two specific issues that they needed to resolve. A handful of FBI informants who worked with the Houston office had made statements in regards to Valenti's associations, particularly with a top bookmaker and hoodlum in the Houston area. Based on my understanding of mafia activities in Houston at the time, having a limited pool of suspects based on the length of the redactions and having seen several scant references to the relationship between the Valenti family and the Lucia family, I concluded this known bookmaker was Joseph Lucia. A number of informants alleged that Valenti was good friends with a top hoodlum and prominent gambler in Houston, and agents suspected that the underworld figure had underwritten the cost of Valenti's wedding and honeymoon suite at the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas. The interviews conducted with people who knew Valenti made it appear as though the FBI were more concerned about Valenti's habits than his personal connections. The FBI wanted to ensure that Valenti himself didn't have a gambling problem. They appeared to consider the association with a top hoodlum as a secondary matter. I would think the almost overt connection to one of Houston's top hoodlums would be a disqualifying factor. Apparently not. After interviewing dozens of Valenti's associates who all praised Valenti's character, the FBI concluded that the relationship posed no threat to national security. In regards to Jack Valenti's true character, I took note of a report that detailed an interview with the woman whom Jack had allegedly engaged in a romantic relationship. The woman, whose name is redacted, told the FBI that she never took their dating seriously as she and Valenti lived very different lifestyles. She explained this by saying that to her, Valenti's life was one of gloss and veneer, and not genuine. She relayed an anecdote that described Valenti as one who would spend his time at a social event, hopping from table to table, speaking with acquaintances and making new ones. She said that Valenti would go to great lengths to make people believe that he held them among his closest friends and that he greatly admired and respected them when actually he would have no regard for them whatsoever. He told the FBI that she believed many of Valenti's friendships were dishonest. Despite the obvious problem with Valenti's character, she goes on to state that she believes he would be honest in all respects as it pertained to other obligations, financial or government-related. The other issue the FBI needed to resolve was whether or not there was any truth to the allegations that Jack Valenti was a homosexual. Throughout the FBI documents on this background check conducted on Valenti starting in December 1963, there are numerous indicators that his sexuality was of great concern. Many of the people interviewed by the FBI were people that Valenti had known at either Humble Oil, the University of Texas, or Harvard. Nearly every one of them was asked about Valenti's dating habits and whether or not he acted appropriately around women. Of course, every person the FBI spoke to gave Valenti glowing reviews. Some even suggested he run for president. Previously confidential FBI files show that Hoover's deputies set out to determine whether Valenti, who had married 2 years earlier, maintained a relationship with a male commercial photographer. The FBI did indeed probe Jack's background for traces of homosexuality, prompted by discovery of a relationship with a gay photographer. However, there is more to this story than NBC portrays. The name of the photographer is not revealed in the FBI documents due to redactions. President Johnson and the FBI both seemed to pay an inordinate amount of attention to this photographer, as was indicated in the inter-office memorandum, after Walter Jenkins had been arrested for a homosexual encounter. While being an allegedly happily married man, Johnson couldn't risk having another homosexual caught in his administration. Valenti's relationship with this gay photographer was reported to the FBI by a Houston informant. He advised that Valenti had many parties in Houston and that this photographer, who resided in California, attended often. While Johnson was certainly scared of having another homosexual outed in his administration, it appears that he and the FBI had a greater incentive for getting to the bottom of this relationship. Valenti reportedly has gone to great lengths to impress President Johnson with Redacted's work as a photographer. As a result of Valenti's recommendation about 2 years ago, President Johnson posed for a photograph by Redacted at Redacted residence in California. Valenti's gay photographer friend had a picture of President Johnson taken 2 years prior to the FBI's background check. The FBI went to great lengths to find and interview this photographer. They put enough effort into it to make me wonder why they felt the need to go as far as they did in order to find him. This reeks of some sort of sexual blackmail, which, if it is the case, drastically changes the power dynamic between Johnson and Valenti. I know I said I wouldn't speculate, but come on, what other conclusions can one come to? Ultimately, the FBI would whitewash Valenti and his background, and he would work in the White House until 1966, when another brewing scandal caught up to him.
Life can change in an instant. My brother-in-law died suddenly, leaving behind my sister and her 2 young kids. He didn't have life insurance, so now they're facing the unthinkable, leaving their home. After seeing what they went through, I immediately called SelectQuote to get life insurance for my family. In 15 minutes, a licensed insurance agent compared policies from highly rated carriers to find me the right coverage in my budget. I got a $500,000 policy for only $16 a month. Plus, I qualified for same-day life insurance. No medical exam was required, and I was covered by the time I hung up. Even if you have a health concern, SelectQuote agents can find you the right policy at the lowest price. And while you can't prepare emotionally for a loss, SelectQuote can give you peace of mind with life insurance. Don't wait until it's too late.
Go to SelectQuote.com to get your free quote today. That's SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. Details on example rate at SelectQuote.com.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Jack Valenti had a sister named Lorraine Valenti, who would later go on to become Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein. Before she married Ted Dinerstein, she was married to a man named Vincent Caltagirone Jr. Vincent, whom we will discuss in much more detail later on, was a shady character at best. He divorced from Lorraine in 1961. In February of 1966, Vincent was brought before the court to testify as a witness in the trial of Candace Mosler, a woman accused of murdering her husband, a wealthy socialite named Jacques Mosler. The Mosler murder took the public by storm, with some who lived through it comparing it to the O.J. Simpson trial in scope and impact. On June 30th, 1964, the incestuous Candace Mosler entered her husband's apartment in Florida to find his dead body fully soaked in blood. Jacques Mosler, a man worth $200 million in gross value, was stabbed to death in his Florida apartment. This is a case that indicates acquisitiveness and how the justice system can be swayed by throwing money at it. Chronicler Jacques Mosler, his wife and nephew murdered him to inherit $200 million. December 23rd, 2021. Candace Mosler had been having a torrid love affair with her own nephew, Melvin Lane Powers. After her husband was found dead from numerous bludgeonings and stab wounds in his Miami residence, it didn't take long for the police to place blame on Candy and her nephew. Vincent Caltagirone had managed to stay out of the news for nearly 2 years. However, as it turns out, Vincent had been Jacques Mosler's roommate in Miami in 1964 at the time of the murder. This is a big deal. The former brother-in-law of Jack Valenti, the current top advisor to the President of the United States, was drawn into the spotlight due to his involvement with the murder of Jacques Mosler, a well-known wealthy socialite. Could this be any bigger of a PR nightmare for Valenti and the Johnson White House? It could. This is why I believe Jack Valenti left the White House. They couldn't risk anyone digging any deeper into Vincent, as he is not who he appears to be on the surface. Any additional digging into Vincent would have led directly back to Jack Valenti and his other life. Vincent had been called to testify as to the sexual proclivities of Mr. Mosler. After Candace Mosler was arrested, she told police that Jacques Mosler was a homosexual. Was Mr. Mosler a homosexual? The witness, Vincent Caltagirone, was asked. Definitely not, he replied. However, this exchange was stricken from the record shortly afterward when Caltagirone testified under cross-examination that he could not himself define homosexuality. Caltagirone, 39, a former employee of Mosler, was divorced in 1961 from the sister of Jack Valenti, a close aide to President Lyndon B. Johnson. Candace Mosler and Melvin Powers would eventually be acquitted. The police declined to further investigate, and no additional suspects were ever named. The case and Vincent faded into obscurity, despite Jack Valenti allegedly leaving the White House for a major upgrade in careers as the new head of the MPAA. The timing of said departure is quite suspect. Vincent testified in court and was subsequently on the front page of every newspaper by February 10, 1966. Jack Valenti was out the door of the White House by June 1st. I just can't see there not being a direct correlation. If I were to speculate on the matter, I would say Vincent probably played a much larger role in Mosler's death, and under no circumstances could the relationship between Vincent and Jack be subjected to any scrutiny whatsoever. In no way could any of this be allowed to lead back to Lyndon Johnson and his own connection to Vincent, which we will discuss later on. There was too much on the line in regards to public perception of the White House, and far too many dirty dealings behind the scenes involving Vincent and Jack for Jack's employment to be allowed to continue. His promotion to the MPAA, as I consider it, was undoubtedly connected to his activities on the grassy knoll, as much as it was to his relationship with Vincent. There is no better place to hide than in plain sight. Outlandish allegations against Jack Valenti, if they were ever to surface, would appear unbelievably ridiculous, as I'm sure they do to many of you now. Both Jack and Vincent work with the CIA. These two sets of relationships are connected to some of the most notorious events in American history, and all attention on possible connections between Jack and Vincent needed to be buried. Thus, Jack had to go. His past duty on behalf of the emerging order would not be forgotten. There are a few interesting dates of note when it comes to Valenti leaving the White House. While Valenti held his position as Johnson's chief advisor, at no time did he ever maintain any top-secret or classified clearances, despite the fact that Valenti had been planning an exit from government to take over Hollywood as head of the MPAA, which happened on June 1st, 1966. He was granted clearance for top secret on May 25, 1966, a mere 6 days before he would allegedly depart government service. Tsai granted him final clearance for top secret on 5/25/66 as a consultant, valid for 180 days only unless appointed in the meantime. Tsai again granted him final clearance for top secret on 5/31/67 as a member of the Board of Foreign Scholarships. The Tsai file does not show any termination of clearance concerning this individual. However, Tsai has advised that all its clearances terminate when the person's relationship with the Department of State terminates. Jack Valenti, who never held a security clearance in his life, was suddenly provided one 6 days before he resigned from the White House. It is then renewed a year later when he's granted a position on the Board of Foreign Scholarships. This is clearly a no-show front job to justify the clearance. We can infer that Valenti then held his clearance for the rest of his life, as the memo clearly indicated that the clearance terminates when the person's relationship with the DOS terminates. Jack's official government employment may have terminated, but I guarantee that his relationship didn't. Why would the head of the MPAA need a top-secret clearance? Because Jack Valenti worked for the CIA his entire double life. He ran the MPAA from D.C. at the behest of the CIA. Jack Valenti is the absolute slam dunk proof that the CIA runs Hollywood. Besides the late date of Valenti's final clearance of top secret, there were some other very odd job reassignments of Valenti which happened just before his resignation. Suddenly, in early April, for no apparent reason, Valenti was transformed from errand boy to a policymaker. He was given most of the national security functions that Moyers originally had inherited from McGeorge Bundy, who retired to head the Ford Foundation. Valenti also presided over the White House meetings of Central Intelligence Agency officials. The CIA's White House liaison man, Dick Helms, reported to Valenti. What exactly is going on here? Vincent Calderon's relationship with Valenti is front page in February of 1966. This should have torpedoed Valenti's chances of moving up in the White House. Instead, he's given all of Bill Moyers' national security functions, placed in charge of CIA meetings, and thrust into a position of policy compared to his prior role, effectively as LBJ's PR man. This change didn't make any sense at the time, and it makes less sense today. According to Jack Anderson, this reassignment of Valenti had insiders puzzled. It confused state and defense officials who had been dealing with Moyers. They received no notice that they should report to Valenti. Why would Johnson approve of this reorganization involving Valenti at such a late date? Valenti's departure for the MPAA didn't happen overnight. It had to have been in the works for months. Why the sudden reorganization, only to be followed by Valenti's departure just weeks later? I smell bigger plans at play here. Undoubtedly, the reorganization had something to do with Jack and his new position as the head of the Hollywood wing of the CIA's propaganda unit. And as far as Jack Valenti's involvement with preparation for the assassination, he was directly responsible for the series of events drawing Kennedy to Texas. This began with Valenti's letter to the president, an invitation to attend the appreciation dinner for Albert Thomas dated September 17, 1963. The letter reads, "Dear Mr. President,
Life can change in an instant. My brother-in-law died suddenly, leaving behind my sister and her 2 young kids. He didn't have life insurance, so now they're facing the unthinkable, leaving their home. After seeing what they went through, I immediately called SelectQuote to get life insurance for my family. In 15 minutes, a licensed insurance agent compared policies from highly rated carriers to find me the right coverage in my budget. I got a $500,000 policy for only $16 a month. Plus, I qualified for same-day life insurance. No medical exam was required, and I was covered by the time I hung up. Even if you have a health concern, SelectQuote agents can find you the right policy at the lowest price. And while you can't prepare emotionally for a loss, SelectQuote can give you peace of mind with life insurance. Don't wait until it's too late.
Go to SelectQuote.com to get your free quote today. That's SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. Details on example rate at SelectQuote.com.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Come on the evening of Thursday, November 21st, the citizens of the 8th Congressional District, Houston and Harris County, will pay tribute to our beloved Congressman, Albert Thomas. More than 1,000 men and women will gather in the Grand Ballroom of the Rice Hotel in Houston to express their gratitude for his 26 years of service to this area and to the nation, and to show their pleasure in Congressman Thomas's decision to stay in office and not retire. We respectfully invite you to be present for this appreciation dinner. You would do this community great honor by your presence. Most of all, your remarks on this evening would be the most rewarding gift of all to your old and devoted friend. And thus it had begun. The plot, which had been in place since the spring, was coming to fruition, and Jack Valenti would be there every step of the way. Besides sending the letter to the president inviting him to Texas, Weekly and Valenti, Jack's Houston-based ad firm, would handle all press communications for the trip. That included the release of the motorcade route to the newspapers on November 18, 1963. 3 days before the assassination. Valenti and his firm would also handle all bookings for Kennedy's trip, including the hosting of the Albert Thomas dinner and all accommodations associated with it. Valenti also had some say in the crafting of the motorcade route itself via his role on the board of the Dallas Citizens Council along with Sam Bloom, one of the owners of the Daltex building and the head of the Sam Bloom advertising agency. Valenti was so prominent in the decision-making process surrounding the entirety of Kennedy's trip to Texas and ultimately the assassination itself that it's unbelievable his name has been left out of the conversation for so long. In the weeks leading up to the assassination, Valenti would stay busy. He would make a stop in Los Angeles 1 week before the assassination where he would be seen in the company of a few very important men. Gary Ween, the former LAPD detective who worked some of the most infamous mob cases, wrote a book titled There's a Fish in the Courthouse. This book was an expose on corruption in Ventura County. In November 1963, Ween was working as an investigator for the LA District Attorney's Bureau of Investigation Criminal Intelligence Unit. Ween was investigating the burglaries that had been occurring at various armories, including at the Oxnard Armory. According to Ween, 4 men controlling the Republican Party and CIA were behind the armory burglaries. These men were George Bush Sr., William P. Clark, Robert Lagomarsino, and Ronald E. Robertson. Bush owns and operates the Nordman Company and Hare Law Firm in Oxnard, California. Clark, Lagomarsino, and Robertson were lawyers in the law firm. Ween tells of his observation of a secret meeting of these 4 men's organization at a clothier called Nudi's Western Wear in Hollywood. He stated that there were more than 24 people at this meeting. He names 4 of them. Caspar Weinberger and George Schultz of the Bechtel Corporation were at this meeting with Jack Valenti and someone who Ween described as his accomplice, Hollywood director Joseph Mankiewicz. Ween then proclaims, a week later, Valenti was on scene of the assassination of JFK in Dallas and tightly ensconced himself with LBJ as his advisor. Johnson was not involved in the murder, and he had no knowledge it was going to occur. Valenti, behind the scenes with media executives of NBC, Hearst Corp, Walt Disney Corp, which owns A&E Networks, prepared a program for the History Channel that portrayed Johnson as the killer of JFK. It was aired on the 40th anniversary of JFK's murder. November 2003. Valenti, with treacherous ill will, now ensconces himself as a friend of LBJ. He joins with Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Lady Bird Johnson wanting a probe into the allegations of the guilty men that LBJ killed JFK. Gary Ween, Ventura, and the Fish in the Courthouse, August 19, 2019. Next to the photographic record, Valenti's involvement in the assassination becomes clear when you begin to untangle the web of lies he spun over the decades. There's no official story version of where Jack Valenti should have been because Jack kept changing the story. If you want to know where Jack Valenti was supposed to have been, you have to track down the official White House documentation for the motorcade. On it, you will find Jack Valenti's name clear as day. Jack was supposed to have been on the official party bus, 24th in the line of cars. You'll also find that Valenti himself is the actual source of this information. This will become quite problematic for Valenti. Despite his claims that the events of the day were etched in his mind, he can't ever seem to recall the exact circumstances he found himself in during the motorcade. The official party bus, as it is labeled, is a full-size Continental Trailways Silver Eagle. Its use was arranged by Sam Bloom himself. It was an overflow vehicle, but ended up transporting some of the more important members of the president's staff. It was a full-size long-distance vehicle with luggage compartments underneath and elevated seating. Riding in one is an unmistakable experience, unless you're Jack Valenti. Jack gave countless interviews over the years. He had plenty of time to practice one story, yet time and time again he failed to remember exactly what he was doing during and after the motorcade. I rode serenely in the motorcade in the 6th car following the open convertible carrying President Kennedy and his wife, as well as John Connally, the governor of Texas, and his wife. My advertising agency was handling the press during that Texas visit by the president and the vice president, and I came to that Dallas motorcade as the guest of Vice President Johnson. In our first example, Valenti clearly indicated he was in the 6th car following the president's open convertible. He also confirms that it was his agency, Weekly and Valenti, that handled the press during the Texas trip. The next day, Valenti was riding with Evelyn Lincoln and Liz Carpenter, 8 cars behind Kennedy, when the motorcade entered Dealey Plaza. In the wake of the inscrutable act of fate that changed my life, he found himself wandering through Parkland Hospital, trying to keep out of everybody's way. Now Jack is 8 cars back. A small discrepancy, but significant as this is one of many changes to the story. Jack also places himself at Parkland Hospital, which will become significant when we discuss the magic bullet. In his book, This Time, This Place, My Life in War, The White House in Hollywood, Valenti tips his hand outright. There at the airport, we formed the motorcade. I found myself in a large car with Evelyn Lincoln, secretary to the president, Pamela Turnor, aide to Mrs. Kennedy, and the irrepressible Liz Carpenter, chief of staff to Mrs. Johnson. We were 6 cars back from the president's open convertible where he and his wife sat in the back seat, with Governor and Nellie Connolly in the seats just in front of them. Despite the fact that Valenti himself helped organize the official motorcade documentation and provided the author with his location on the party bus, 24th in line, he's now claiming to have been in a large car 6 cars behind the president. This is a lie that cannot be untold. It is as significant as it gets. There's no mistaking a full-size Continental Trailway Silver Eagle with a large car. The next quote from Valenti featured in the LBJ Presidential Library Oral History series recorded October 18th, 1969. From Love Field, we got into a motorcade. As I recall, I got into a small bus. Liz Carpenter, Pamela Turnor, Evelyn Lincoln, and assorted other presidential aides were there. I would say from the president's standpoint, it was a lower-level group, but Evelyn Lincoln was President Kennedy's secretary. Pamela Turnor worked for Mrs. Kennedy. We got aboard this smallish van and we got into the motorcade. I would guess we were 12 or 14 cars from the front of the line. Valenti has once again forgotten where he was during the motorcade. In the same paragraph, Valenti claims to have boarded a small bus and a smallish van. This is outrageous. This is truly unbelievable. Now Valenti is claiming that he is not 6 cars behind Kennedy, not 8 cars behind Kennedy, but a whopping 12 to 14 cars behind the president's limousine. The most important alibi in American history, and Valenti can't even remember his lines. We can say with certainty that these are lines, scripted and rehearsed. We know this because of his consistent involvement of Evelyn Lincoln, Pamela Turnor, and Liz Carpenter in his story. However, they never corroborate Valenti's alibi. I remember I couldn't tell you where we were in Dallas. I assume that it's the Simmons underpass. That's all of a sudden the motorcade began without reason to speed up, tripling the speed, maybe quadrupling. We attempted to keep up, and we knew something was wrong because of all of a sudden we got separated from the cars, and the van driver at the direction of someone went directly to the Trade Mart. When we got there, to our amazement, no one else was there. We were by ourselves, it seemed. We got out of the bus and we went around to the rear of the Trade Mart and we found nobody there. At that time, while we knew something was wrong, we didn't know what. We walked out of the Trade Mart onto the parking ramp and a fellow was carrying a pocket radio and he told us the president had been shot. At this time, we didn't know, and that the vice president had been shot. Consternation invaded us all at that point, and then we found out on this radio that President Kennedy was at the Parkland Hospital. This comes from Jack Valenti's oral history in the LBJ Presidential Library from October of 1969. Valenti lays out pretty clear series of events here. Valenti lays out a pretty clear series of events. He described the driver as a van driver. He stated that he found out the president had been killed via a pocket radio at the Trade Mart. He also stated, to their amazement, no one else was in there. Remember, this entire time, Valenti had claimed he was in the presence of Pamela Turnor, Liz Carpenter, and Evelyn Lincoln. Valenti penned an article for the New York Times, November 22nd, 1998, the 35th anniversary of the assassination. He doubled down on how well he remembered the motorcade. Even now, so many long years later, I remember every minute of the motorcade's journey from Love Field through downtown Dallas, past the drab building of undistinguished architecture called the Texas Schoolbook Depository. I find this to be so truly insulting. In this very article, he again contradicts himself as to his whereabouts. We wound our way into the downtown area and onto Dealey Plaza past thousands of waving onlookers. Suddenly, the car in front of us leaped forward, racing from 10 miles per hour to 60. As our car tried to keep pace, we passengers who had heard no gunshots looked at one another with bewilderment. Don't worry, I ventured. The president is late for his speech and he's hurrying to get there. It was not wholly mollifying, but the alternatives were too bleak to consider, so we sped to the Dallas Trade Mart. When we arrived, a large crowd was awaiting the president, but there was no president. Now we knew that something was desperately wrong. A Secret Service agent told us matter-of-factly, the president has been shot, as has the governor, there at Parkland Hospital. A deputy sheriff took me there. Here we have the most distinct of contradictions by Valenti as to his actions and observations, particularly as they pertain to the Trade Mart. In 1969, Valenti was amazed that besides he and his party, no one else was present at the Trade Mart. He emphasized the fact that they were alone. They walked around to the other side of the building, according to Valenti, where we found nobody there. In 1998, however, Valenti recalled something much different. He now stated, when we arrived, a large crowd was awaiting the president, but there was no president. The size of the crowd aside, Valenti proceeds to update how he found out the president was dead. In 1969, he had heard it on the pocket radio of some fellow. However, he was told by a Secret Service agent matter-of-factly that the president had been shot. There's just no squaring this circle. Valenti had no idea what had happened at the Trade Mart because he was never there. I ran up to a deputy sheriff, a huge .357 Magnum strapped to his ample hip. Would he take us to the hospital? He would. We pushed aside debris in his back seat. Everyone piled in. With siren keening, we barreled to Parkland. I escorted Mrs. Lincoln to the second floor to the administrator's office. She was inconsolable. I leaped down the stairs to the basement, an area crowded with walking zombies, congressmen whose faces were contorted with disbelief. The crush of the nightmare had not yet fully been comprehended. Valenti had stuck by his story that he had commandeered a vehicle from a cop and then drove him, Liz Carpenter, Evelyn Lincoln, and Pamela Turner to Parkland Hospital. I gathered up my brood, commandeered a Dallas County deputy sheriff's car, conveyed to him the importance of my companions, and with stern keening, we flew to Parkland. That's not how Liz Carpenter remembered it. In a 2003 interview from the series Remembering the JFK Assassination, The Carpenter Collection, Ms. Carpenter tells quite a different tale. I was in a staff bus with some of the Kennedy staff, and we went on to the back of the Trade Mart, not knowing what had caused the turnaround, and there was a Secret Service man who said to Mrs. Lincoln, "The president's been shot." We hurried all over the parking lot to find a car. She said I must go to Mrs. Kennedy, and so we found a police car, and the policeman very accommodatingly took us all in. It was crowded. I think it was myself, Marie Femmer, President Johnson's secretary, and then on the back seat, the three secretaries on the staff of the Kennedys. Marie Femmer, Vice President Johnson's secretary, gave quite a detailed statement about her interaction with Valenti that morning. She was asked about the bus. She had ridden in during the motorcade in Dallas, the bus being the Continental Trailways Silver Eagle. You know, I do remember back in Fort Worth a conversation with Jack Valenti on a bus. We picked up the morning newspapers and they were filled with that vile stuff about President Kennedy, terrible ads that some Texans had taken out. I remember how disturbed Jack and I were. I remember that back in Fort Worth, the newspapers, I don't remember how Jack got there or anything. I guess we picked up Jack in Houston probably the night before. Jack had joined the trip at the vice president's request in Houston. Marie Femmer accurately recalled meeting Jack on a bus in Fort Worth. However, Jack flew to Dallas on Air Force Two with the vice president. It was a 12-minute flight that brought Valenti from Carswell Air Force Base to Love Field. Therefore, Femmer's statement is not in any way an indicator that Valenti was ever on the Continental Trailways bus in Dallas. In fact, she never mentions Valenti ever again. Femmer's statements completely corroborate the statements of Liz Carpenter, who also never mentioned Jack Valenti. The bus dropped us at the Trade Mart. We didn't know anything. We were looking around. The Trade Mart was a building that was new to me. It had been built since I left there. Liz and I sort of wondered, what is this? And wonder where the speech is. I know Mary Gallagher and Evelyn Lincoln didn't know where to go. Feeling we were Texans and the hosts, we said, why don't you come with us? Let's see if we can find our way. But we didn't see anybody. No Secret Service, nothing. There was a Texas Ranger standing at the door and he said, "Lady, you can't come in here." Liz said, "We're with the vice president. We have to come in." He said, "Well, you can't come in here. The president's been shot." I said, "My goodness, that's a terrible thing to say." Marie Femmer can now account for Liz Carpenter, Evelyn Lincoln, and Mary Gallagher, but still no mention of Jack Valenti. Despite Jack Valenti's insistence that he commandeered a sheriff's car, this story appears to have been appropriated from Marie Femmer. This is Femmer's statement on the matter. All right, we're getting to Parkland. Liz by this time was frantic. I just really didn't know what to do. So I gathered up Mary Gallagher and Evelyn Lincoln and I commandeered the Texas State Ranger car. I said, "Here's my problem. This is who I work for, and here are the president's secretaries. We don't know what's going on, but we know that they are not here. If they have been shot, they're at Parkland. Will you take us there? I still have his card. His last name was Good, Goode, and I still have his card." Jack Valenti's story about being in the motorcade is elaborate fiction, debunked by the statements of Evelyn Lincoln, Marie Femmer, and Liz Carpenter. He was never there. He had last been seen by Marie Femmer in Fort Worth that morning prior to the flight to Dallas. Valenti's never seen on the Continental Trailways bus, but we can say with certainty that Liz Carpenter, Evelyn Lincoln, Pamela Turner, Mary Gallagher, and Marie Femmer were. After arriving at the Trade Mart, it is Femmer who tracks down a Texas Ranger named Good who agrees to drive the 5 women to Parkland Hospital. This is what happened. Every word out of Valenti's mouth in regards to where he was during the motorcade is a blatant lie designed to cover for the fact that he was on the grassy knoll. Only one person attempted to provide an alibi for Jack Valenti, Elizabeth Forsling Harris. Harris is primarily known for her role in the founding of Ms. Magazine. Wikipedia describes her as having been a reporter for Newsweek from 1947 until 1951.
Life can change in an instant. My brother-in-law died suddenly, leaving behind my sister and her 2 young kids. He didn't have life insurance, so now they're facing the unthinkable, leaving their home. After seeing what they went through, I immediately called SelectQuote to get life insurance for my family. In 15 minutes, a licensed insurance agent compared policies from highly rated carriers to find me the right coverage in my budget. I got a $500,000 policy for only $16 a month. Plus, I qualified for same-day life insurance. No medical exam was required, and I was covered by the time I hung up. Even if you have a health concern, SelectQuote agents can find you the right policy at the lowest price. And while you can't prepare emotionally for a loss, SelectQuote can give you peace of mind with life insurance. Don't wait until it's too late.
Go to SelectQuote.com to get your free quote today. That's SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. Details on example rate at SelectQuote.com.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
It states that she worked with the Peace Corps from 1961 through 1963. She also worked as a TV producer for ABC and founded a public relations firm in Dallas. Wikipedia, however, left out some key facts about Ms. Harris. It failed to inform the reader that her partner in Ms. Magazine was none other than feminist pioneer and acknowledged CIA spook Gloria Steinem. Harris penned an article for the Washington Post dated November 20th, 1988, titled Looking Back in Sorrow. In it, she voiced her regrets that she still held, as well as her overwhelming feelings of guilt that she still possessed some 35 years after the assassination. Harris, who was working for Sam Bloom's advertising agency, was a key point of contact for the White House in the planning of the trip and the organization of the motorcade. She was the primary middleman connecting Sam Bloom and Kenny O'Donnell. For me, this is enough guilt by association to name Forsling a knowing and willing conspirator. Her attempt to provide a cover for Valenti confirms this in my view. In her article, she described her experience in the motorcade. Riding with me were, among others, the president's doctor, Rear Admiral George Berkeley, Kennedy's secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, Mrs. Kennedy's secretary, Mary Gallagher, and her press secretary, Pamela Turnur, U.S. Attorney Barefoot Sanders, Jack Valenti, acting as a walking tape recorder who had been brought along from Houston by Johnson and equipped to record whatever the vice president had to say that day, Liz Carpenter, a close friend and longtime member of the Johnson staff, and Luther Holcomb, a Methodist minister who was to deliver the luncheon benediction. It's stunning to see the small details that these people let slip through. Harris clearly puts herself on the Continental Trailway's Silver Eagle, however, no one else ever mentions her at all that day, nor does her name appear in the official White House documentation. You will not see her name arise in the assassination story until she is deposed by the HSCA on August 16, 1978. Her testimony allegedly appears on page 25 of JFK document number 01352, which is nondescript. It is likely buried, intentionally so, at the National Archives. This document contains extremely valuable data concerning Harris's involvement in the events that day. It also most likely contains statements made about where she was and who she was with during the motorcade. Those statements, I guarantee, make no mention of Valenti of the Continental Trailways bus, because neither she nor Valenti were passengers on it that day. Harris claims that Reverend Luther Holcomb was on the bus with her and Jack Valenti. This is quite the lie. Despite not being listed on the official motorcade roster, Holcomb's daughter, Jan Flowers, told the press that the Reverend was in the light-colored Mercury Comet Caliente convertible, the fifth car behind President Kennedy, where he rode with none other than Mayor Earl Cabell and his wife. Kennedy had appointed Holcomb to represent Texas on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission in 1961. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson named Holcomb vice chairman of the U.S. Equal Employment Commission, then a new regulatory agency created to enforce the employment opportunity provisions of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 1970, President Richard M. Nixon reappointed him to a second term. Reverend Holcomb rode in the fifth car in the procession of cars in downtown Dallas on that faithful day. Flowers said her father said he heard what he thought were gunshots. Former Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell, an avid hunter, rode in the car with Holcomb, confirmed they were indeed shots being fired. From the Athens Review, Kathy Nailing, daughter of minister tasked with sharing tragic news, speaks at CCL, November 22, 2013. Another problem with Harris's statement is her depiction of Jack Valenti's role. She stated that he was acting as a walking tape recorder and that he was equipped to record whatever the vice president had said that day. This is provably false. Jack was a last-minute tag-along. He attended as a friend of Lyndon Johnson's, not as an employee, despite the fact that Valenti's firm handled all of the arrangements for the president's trip to Texas. He claimed many times over the years that Johnson had invited him as a friend. Valenti was supposed to fly back to Houston after the trip to Dallas. He did not anticipate, or so we are told, that he would assume the role of Johnson's top advisor and gatekeeper on November 22, 1963. That being the case, we can rule out any notion that at the time of the bus ride through downtown, Valenti was some kind of active assistant to the vice president. Harris continues to explain that after arriving at the Trade Mart, she would guide the other guests through the back door and into the kitchen. My bus was too far behind the presidential car to hear the shots, but I saw the car speed up and assured Mrs. Lincoln, who seemed concerned that they were just trying to make up the 5 minutes and we were now behind time. Unlike the press buses, our bus pulled up to the back door of the Trade Mart, where I would take the guests through the kitchen to the seats that had been saved for us. This statement is problematic for numerous reasons. No one else ever mentions entering through the back door and heading through a kitchen. Liz Carpenter clearly stated that the state trooper at the door refused to let them enter the building. Another problem with Harris's description of her activities that evening is that despite her claims she was with Evelyn Lincoln and that she had accompanied her off the bus, Marie Femmer clearly articulated that she and Liz Carpenter found Mary Gallagher and Evelyn Lincoln at the Trade Mart, lost, but made no mention of Elizabeth Forsling Harris. Femmer stated, "I know Mary Gallagher and Evelyn Lincoln didn't know where to go. Feeling we were Texans and the hosts, we said, "Why don't you come with us? Let's see if we can find our way." That is a clear indication that Harris, despite her statements, was not with Evelyn Lincoln and Mary Gallagher at the Trade Mart. Later, I would learn that Dr. Berkeley had immediately left, found a taxi, and headed for Parkland. Where the others had gone, I never quite knew, but I was left with Evelyn Lincoln, Mary Gallagher, Pamela Tourneur, Liz Carpenter, and Jack Valenti. Suddenly, a Texas Ranger appeared, walking toward us. His name tag read Goodfellow. I remember. He had his own car there. He would take us, the 6 of us. The other women sat in the back. I sat on Valenti's lap in the front, my head pressed against the windshield. Goodfellow's uniform got us through the blockades the police were setting up to manage the heavy traffic already moving towards Parkland. Nobody said anything. Not a word. Washington Post. Elizabeth Forsling Harris, looking back in sorrow, November 20th, 1988. Again, based on the statements of Liz Carpenter and Marie Femmer, Harris's claim can be easily debunked. At this time, the group assembled at the Trade Mart that would be driven to Parkland Hospital included Carpenter, Femmer, Gallagher, Lincoln, and Tourneur. Harris and Valenti are nowhere to be found. Harris also made the mistake of identifying the state trooper as Goodfellow. We know, as per Marie Femmer, that the trooper's name was Good, G-O-O-D-E, and that Femmer was still in possession of his business card. Under the circumstances, I tend to believe Ms. Femmer. The nail in the coffin of Harris's alibi for Jack Valenti came when she stated that she had ridden to Parkland Hospital in the state trooper's vehicle, riding on Jack Valenti's lap with her head pressed against the window. Once again, thanks to Liz Carpenter, we can completely discredit the statements made by both Harris and Valenti. Where Harris actually was during the motorcade, we will likely never know. The primary pattern that emerged when evaluating the information at hand is that the statements made by Harris were clearly coordinated with Jack Valenti, as their perspectives were nearly identical. Neither was ever mentioned by any of the 5 female secretaries who were provably present on the Continental Trailways bus during the motorcade, and who rode to Parkland Hospital in Trooper Good's vehicle. The funny thing is, Jack Valenti never mentions Elizabeth Forsling Harris in any of his statements about November 22nd, ever. The irony is overwhelming. I asked historian Johnny Vedmore if he had any information on Harris, as he has an expertise on the behind-the-scenes goings-on of the various intelligence communities of this era. He advised, a little. She set up Ms. Magazine alongside Stan Pottinger's girlfriend, Gloria Steinem. That was a supposed feminist publication, which was actually another CIA op on close inspection. That's from a personal communication with Johnny Vedmore of newspaste.com. In hindsight, it's pretty obvious that Ms. Magazine and the entire feminist movement, spearheaded by Elizabeth Forsling Harris's partner, Gloria Steinem, was a CIA operation meant to disrupt the family unit. Typical Marxist methodology. This is all relevant due to the relationships at play. Harris was clearly working for the CIA during her time at Ms. Magazine. I would highly suspect her time in the Peace Corps was spent doing more than sowing joy around the world. Harris caught the attention of Penn Jones, who wrote about her in quite a scathing manner in his book, Forgive My Grief, Volume 4. The section titled Infiltrating Again appears on page 50 of this classic work. Jones called out Ms. Magazine and Harris directly. He stated that the women's liberation movement, as well as the youth movement, needed to be aware of infiltration by the enemy. Jones said that the Liberation Group may very well have been taken over already by the Ms. publisher, Mrs. Elizabeth Forsling Harris. Penn Jones, Forgive My Grief, Volume 4, December 2nd, 1974. This unbelievably keen observation by Penn Jones was made 14 years before Harris came forward providing an alibi for Jack Valenti. According to Jones, Forsling moved to Dallas several years before the assassination. She was known to have been close to Stanley Marcus of Neiman Marcus fame and had been married to a Leon Harris of A. Harris & Company. Jones accuses Harris directly of having been sent to Dallas as an observer, one who would keep an eye on prominent people in Dallas. Taking over the most powerful country in the world is not a small task. Having constant surveillance on the opinion makers in Dallas was only one of the necessary requisites in the planning stages. Betty Forsling appears to have been one of the high-level observers moved here from Washington. As Harris's statements are clearly contradictory to the statements of the 5 women who were provably on the Continental Trailways bus and present at the Trade Mart after the assassination, it is safe to say she was not on scene, and she fabricated her story to cover for Jack Valenti. Why Harris felt the need to cover for Jack Valenti at such a late date, 25 years after the assassination, is a mystery to me. Add to that the observations of Penn Jones and the role Harris played in subverting American culture via Ms. Magazine, and you're left with a very striking picture of a CIA operative covering for another, as Jack Valenti was on the grassy knoll. After the assassination, Jack would have a monumental rise to the highest levels of power. From lead advisor to Lyndon Johnson to overseeing the largest propaganda operation in history as the head of the MPAA, Jack Valenti is most certainly the most important figure in American history that no one ever talks about.
You ever get the feeling the city walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating your soul? You crave wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe chase some elk, fish a private stream. Well, listen up. There's a whole world out there, and finding your own piece of it just got easier. Head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forest, mountains, you name it. Search by acreage, location, the kind of hunting or fishing you dream of. Land.com. It's where the adventure begins.
Does this podcast make you happy? Of course it does. That's why you're here. But it only comes out once a week. For happiness every night, you need Adam and Eve. Yes, I'm talking about sex toys. It's cool. You have earbuds in, right? Adam and Eve, America's most trusted source for adult products, has been making people very happy for over 50 years. With thousands of toys for both men and women. Just go to adamandeve.com now and enter code IHEART for 50% off almost any one item, plus free discreet shipping. That's adamandeve.com, code IHEART for 50% off.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.